Okay, I think we'll get started. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. So our main topic today will be home networking, and I will be giving the presentation there. Before we get to our main topic, we do have a few club items to cover. Our next general meeting is June 21st, back here in the Caribbean room. We have trouble getting the Baltic, and we get it when we can. But the main topic on the 21st of June will be backup, and I'll be giving that presentation. In there, I'll be talking about backing up to the cloud and backing up local. So I'm a proponent of kind of both of those strategies. Also, I'll be talking about multiple devices because we all typically have multiple devices where we have pictures or music or data, how to share and how to back up and make sure that everything's there. A little bit on document management, some of the things that you can do maybe to make things easier to work with, and then we'll talk about some other options there. We also have a Macintosh Special Interest Group, and their next meeting is this Friday, May 19th, and they meet in the 201 auditorium, and they set their agenda right before the meeting. So if you do have Apple tablet or any Apple gear, it's worthwhile attending those meetings also. Officers, Jim Holman is our president there. Linda Brown is our vice president. Paul Ebert back there is our membership secretary. Mike Griffin leads the MacSig and is our treasurer. Stan Miller is our secretary. Andrew Petrucci is our communications coordinator. And my name is Tom Kreuzer. I'm a director at large. Members old and new, you can pay your dues to Paul. And also a reminder, if you are changing your email, make sure and notify Paul or myself so that we can keep in touch with you. So these meeting notices and stuff like that, we send that all out by email. And we don't know when your email changes, so make sure and let us know. If you do have any suggestions for topics, you can email your ideas or talk to any of the board members. We're always looking for people to volunteer to present on hardware and software that they use, whether it's at home or at work. If you don't want to present, we do have a monthly eBytes newsletter, and you're welcome to submit short meaning a sentence or two, to a long article. Or if you just have a question, you can submit it, and we'll do the best to answer the question also. We do have our website. We publish the handouts, and there is a handout for this meeting in the back of the room there. We publish the slides and the handouts, and we usually try and record it, so that's also a link to the recording is out there. We have a deals section. We have the eBytes newsletter. And the link to that is at the bottom of the handout that's in back there. Any club questions before we start the main topic? Okay, our main topic today is home networking. And nowadays, a strong home network is really, really important because we're starting to connect so many things together. And the current buzzword is the Internet of Things, the IoT. So it's a combination of all these different devices and having them talk and share information. We're using things like tablets, phones, TVs, lights, thermostats, security systems. We want to stream video for our TV. We've got all these demands on our home network and what it can do there. As more and more of the devices shift from wired to wireless, poor networks or poor Wi-Fi is the #1 cause of frustration for people at home. You go from room to room, or it cuts in and out, or it's not very fast, and so poor Wi-Fi is a huge concern for most people there. A good home network takes thought, planning, and good hardware. And so you really need all of those things. The thought part is how are you going to use it, and where's the best place to put it, and planning so that you can upgrade and do some things. And the good hardware is if you've got a router that's more than 2 years old, it's probably time to replace it. The technology has changed, gotten better, quality, you'd have a better quality system, faster, everything there. We'll first start out talking about my own home network, and my old system that I had home network is I had Comcast, and so what I had is I had coming into my house the cable, and the cable was coming in to my back office, into my back office here. When it came in, it was then connected to a modem. And that modem translated the cable frequencies in that to an Ethernet. And then went from the Ethernet to a router, a Wi-Fi router. And what I had is an 802.11n router in the office here. And I also had 2 Ethernets coming off of the router there that I used to connect to like the laptop that I have here and my desk PC. So that's what I started with years ago, and that worked fine. I had a weak signal to like my front living room here, but I did have a little bit of a signal all throughout the house there. My signal was also weak because this back office that I have was added on after the house, and so this is a stucco house, and so I have a stucco wall here, and stucco is a good blocker of Wi-Fi signal, and plaster walls in the house, and so my signal was not very strong all throughout the house. What I did...
Tom, how did you know it was not very strong? I'm going to talk about that.
I'll talk a little bit about that, but I might as well mention it now, and I mention it later in the handout here too. There's some tools. No, people can can ask questions. If it's going to be too long, then I'll cut it off. But in this case, the tools that I use is I have an app on my phone called Wi-Fi Analyzer, and it lets me see all the networks and the strength and the security and how it's set up. So it goes beyond the strength, but so you can check and see the quality of the signal that you are receiving there. And you can walk around your house from room to room and you can check it. If you don't have an app there, or you just have a laptop, there's software, and I mentioned that in the handout here, that you can load on the laptop, and you can carry the laptop around the house and see the various signals and how strong it is there. But that's how you can check and see whether you are getting a weak signal or a strong signal there. But to improve my signal, what I ended up doing is I found at actually a church sale, I found another router for $5, and that was the cheapest solution for me. As I bought the router, it was also an 802.11n router, and I put it in my living room up at the front of the house. And what I did then is I ran an Ethernet cord from the back of my house to the front of my house to connect the Wi-Fi router in the front of the house there. My network was more complicated and kludgy than it had to be. It was an old standard. 802.11 is an old standard. It's not as fast, and because I had 2 routers in that, I'd get interference between the 2 routers, which would impact the speed that I could get, and it wasn't an automatic transfer from one router to the other. It's more of a manual process of I could disconnect from one and then connect to the other. Wasn't an automatic handoff or anything there. But that I used for probably the last 4 years or so. Yes.
Could you have some benefit by just simply elevating the first Wi-Fi router to the ceiling or something?
Yes, I mention in here some things that you can do. Certainly the position of the router impacts the quality of the signal, so you can try getting it higher. You can try changing the direction, because even though a lot of the routers don't have external antenna, there is an antenna in there that is transmitting, so just the fact of orientating at 90 degrees may improve your signal or may make it worse. So certainly that's something to try to improve the quality of the signal if you're just having trouble like in one particular spot. If you're having trouble all over, then you're probably going to have to redo your network there to get things to work. Okay. So earlier this year, I was going to change things. I mentioned that I had Comcast for my internet and my TV, and I was changing, and I was going to change to CenturyLink and just get the internet from them. My TV I now get through over the air and through the internet, so I wanted to cut the cord from Comcast. But we won't talk about the TV part of this. We're just talking about how to set up a home network there. So now is my opportunity to change my Wi-Fi router that I had, the location of the Wi-Fi router, and the Ethernet runs that I had. So before I had them come in and install, I wanted to check these things out. And one of my major requirements is my house is very small. It's roughly 1,000 square feet, and it's all on one level there. So I should be able to get by with one router and not have to have two routers there.
CenturyLink
DSL. Yeah, and in my area, it's fiber optics. So it's fiber optics into the house. I could get up to 1 gigabyte speed. I just purchased 40 megabytes of speed there. But last year, I live in Highland Park in St. Paul, they did run fiber optics through the neighborhood. So I wanted the single router just to make it easier for setting it up. Also, because I was cutting the cord with my TV, I wanted to make sure that it'd be easy for me to cast or show streaming TV on the different TVs within the house. So if I was in my bedroom, I could watch TV. If I was in my den, I could watch TV. If I was in my living room, I could watch TV. So I could easily cast or show the different TV shows on the different TV screens there. Before I did anything, and this is what I recommend, test your locations. So trying to find the best location of where you should put the router. Well, CenturyLink doesn't care where you put the router. It's up to you to figure out where you'd like to have that router. And so I did some testing to see different locations. Let's see here. Let me go back. So my house is set up this way. Well, obviously the central point is kind of right in here. And so would my router work okay in a bedroom closet here? Would it work okay in the kitchen here? Would it work okay in a closet? I had options on where I could put the router there. And what I recommend that you do is go through and test these different locations. It's fairly easy to test the locations. You want it somewhere central is where you're going to start with. Don't try putting it on the in the den on the outside or on one end of the house or the other end of the house. You are going to have problems if you're trying to get by with one router there. I mentioned testing here. It's fairly easy to test the locations because what you can do is if you have an Ethernet cable, so this is an Ethernet cable with Ethernet connections, it's 100 feet long. I can plug it into my existing router in my back room. I can run it to my kitchen to a new router there, and I can try and see what the signal is like in there without having to drill holes, do any fancy wiring, and then find out that it's not going to work well there. So by all means, test it, run this temporary Ethernet. You can usually get power either in the room or run an extension cord to get power, and do all of this before drilling holes. And when you're testing, you're also using these apps and stuff like that to see the strength and the quality of the signal at all the different points in your house that's important to you. So you can check all that out and move, you know, I end up putting this in my closet. Well, I put it up high in the closet. So you can experiment with, if I stick it down low, I get this kind of signal in these rooms. If I stick it up high, I get this kind of signal. So by all means, test that stuff out using your temporary cable and your temporary electricity before you start drilling holes. Now, this way you'll know what the signal is, and there won't be any surprises where it's not working the way that you thought it would work there, and limits the number of holes that you're going to drill and do there. I mentioned the apps and the software to check the signal strength. I do list later on in this handout here. Also, if you're not familiar, some of the high-end routers, some of the more expensive routers use what's called Power over Ethernet, or PoE. Power over Ethernet means that you don't have to find a plug-in to plug in your router. It's getting its power over the Ethernet cable. So within the Ethernet cable, power is going to be run there. And an example of that is like all of 3M's routers. If you've ever seen them up on the walls and stuff like that, there's no electrical plug-in there because all they have is an Ethernet cable that goes to there, and that's what provides the power for the router there. So if you need that, you can certainly look at getting one of these routers that supports the power over the Ethernet there. The router that I ended up with, I knew needed a power, and all my closet had was a pull chain light in it. So in order for me to get power, the simplest and easiest thing was I went to Menards, bought a new pull light socket for $2.50, and it had an outlet on it, has an outlet plug-in on it. Put that in, ran a little extension cord for that, and then plugged my router into there. So it was fairly easy to get power to some of these locations where you may not have a plug-in in a closet, or whether it's wherever your best location is going to be there. Next question was kind of what Wi-Fi router to use. When I was looking at CenturyLink, I saw that CenturyLink did have an option to purchase the router that they supported and recommended for $99. So you could buy this router from them. The router is Prism Technicolor. It's an 802.11 AC router, supports up to a gigabyte speed there, and is a 2.4 and 5 gigahertz router there. It's certainly not the highest performance router, AC router, but it's an adequate router. AC routers sell for anywhere from about $25 up to $300. So there's quite a range there of prices that you can pay for routers, and each does have its advantages, and some of them do have better antenna, which means that you're going to get better signals in some of the rooms. But since this was what was recommended by CenturyLink, I looked out on the internet. It was getting good reviews, and the price was reasonable there. Normally, this router, if you went to Amazon or that and tried to buy it, I believe it'd be about $130 or something like that. So you were even getting a discount by buying it from CenturyLink. And the other option is to lease it from CenturyLink, where you pay, each month there, and you'll see later on when we get into some of the stuff. I don't recommend leasing because you pay so much money over the life of your contract that you might as well buy it, and you're going to be further ahead there. Plus, then you can switch it out in 2 years or 3 years for something better. Yes?
Is there any reason to have a combined unit modem router, or would you actually prefer to sell?
I don't recommend that. The modem router combination, the Comcast or Xfinity will call that their gateway. The problem with that is people then tend to hang on to that longer because they don't want to spend more money. Like when I had Comcast, I had a separate modem and I had a separate router. I paid $30 for that modem on eBay, and then I could upgrade and I could do anything I wanted to the router and that. So I always recommend having separate there.
Is that what you got was combined? Or?
No, this is purely a router here. This is purely the Wi-Fi router. Actually, CenturyLink, because of the fiber, there is a modem that they put in that converts the fiber to Ethernet. That has no smarts in it whatsoever. CenturyLink does not charge for that. There's no monthly charge. There's nothing. They put that in. So, and you'll see it a little later. I'll show a picture of it there. Yes?
What's the advantage of
Dual band, the ACs come in many different flavors and capability. The dual band means that if I have, let's say I'm using my phone here and I'm connecting to my network, I can have 2 connections to the router at the same time for this device. And that means that I can roughly get twice the speed there. So if I had one connection and I was downloading a 10 megabit file, it's going to take X amount of time. Well, with dual band, 2 connections, it's going to be half the time to download that 10 megabit file. So there's things like MIMO and dual band. You can actually get up to 8 bands connecting, but it's the modem. Buying a modem like that is only good if you have devices that support it. So chances are, if you've got a phone, an older phone or that, it doesn't support any of the new stuff anyway. So your weakest link is whatever device you have and that.
Right, I think, isn't it the AC, only AC supports 5 gigahertz? Or does the N support that too?
The ends at the end did support the 5 gigahertz speed, so you did see some of them out there. And it's kind of a fallacy because people will say, oh, I've got the 5 gigahertz, so that's going to give me the best coverage throughout the house. Actually, 5 gigahertz does not travel as far as 2.4 gigahertz. The shorter wavelength can reach out further than the smaller 5 gigahertz. 5 gigahertz is more speed, twice the speed, but it doesn't reach as far. So that's why you still see the modem supporting both frequencies there, the AC modems and stuff like that. And it is good to have both those, and you can try it out and see what works best. If you get a high quality 5G signal to your living room, by all means, and your device supports 5G, so again, the device has to support it, and you're getting a good quality, connect with that. If you're not, try the 2.4, and the 2.4 may give you better performance than the 5 there. Okay? Okay. So I was going to get their router there, and I was getting free installation, so I was planning on what I wanted installed, and I did want my router installed in the closet, and I wanted them to run an Ethernet to my back office PC. Even though my back office PC does have a wireless card in there, I wanted an Ethernet to go back there. as he was doing the install, he was putting in Cat 5e cable, and I knew that I really didn't want Cat 5e. I would have preferred Cat 6 cable, but I said, do you have Cat 6? Can we put in Cat 6? And he said, no, they only install 5e. But if you're running your own lines, be sure and buy Cat 6. And you can buy Cat 6 cable out on eBay, and I'll pass this around in a little bit. You can buy this 100 feet costs $10. So it's relatively inexpensive there. The Cat 6, you'll see, provides more shielding, so it does support faster transmissions. Not that what I'm buying from CenturyLink will exceed the Cat 5e, but the next version, and if you're thinking down the road 2 years, 4 years, will my Ethernet still support it? Go for the Cat 6 there. And there's actually Cat 7 and things like that, but the Cat 7 is too expensive. Go for Cat 6 now. Yes.
What usually comes into the house?
I'll show what CenturyLink is putting in there, and that. So if it's not answered, be sure and bring it up at that time. Within the house, because I have a back bedroom and that room that was added on, and that I had already had some holes drilled for where I wanted stuff to go, and I drilled some just to make the installation go a lot faster. I also used string to run a string down some of the problem areas. So it just makes it easier to do the final installation and to get things where you want. Because some of what you will run into, whether it's CenturyLink or Comcast, is let's say like my back bedroom. Well, my back bedroom has a crawl space underneath it. Well, the Comcast or CenturyLink isn't going to want to go into the crawl space and crawl through there. What their typical solution is, we'll run it on the outside of the house, or we'll pop it up in the room and run it along the baseboard or something, and I didn't want that. I wanted it underneath. Well, it wasn't hard to run underneath. I mentioned here, I've run other telephone and stuff like that before, so I just drilled a hole through the floor where I wanted it, put a piece of string down there. Then I have a roof rake that's the handle to the roof rake, about 20 feet long. Feed that in there, grab the string, pull that through. Then when he came with the Ethernet, he brought the Ethernet up to that. We taped it around the string, pulled it back up exactly where I wanted it. So with a little bit of planning and that, you can fish the stuff around there. My basement, about half of it is finished, so I had to work around some of that stuff, and excuse me, with a little bit of planning, you can pull the wires along heating ducts, pipes, electrical that currently exist. So you can find your way to run the cables and stuff like that fairly easily. After he did the install, and the install took him less than an hour there, he was glad. He was in and out of there. After he left, I wanted to run my own Ethernet lines, and so I'll show you those in a little bit, but I wanted another Ethernet line to my back office, and I wanted 2 lines up to my living room where my TV is located. Before he left, I did check the wire speed, and I was getting 41 megabits down and a little over 6 up, which is what I had purchased. I had purchased 40 megabyte speed there. And I did check the connections of the 5G and the 2.4G, and everything. I was getting the 40 meg, over 40 meg, and over 6 on those too. So I checked those out, and I just list one of the places where you can go to check out the speed there. Okay. So this is my new setup, and you had asked what's coming in. Well, what's coming in from the pole or from the utility is fiber optics. So there's a fiber optic line coming in here to my house, and then from the house it's going down into my washroom down here in the basement. And within here, this is where they installed their fiber optics to Ethernet modem. So there's a modem that sits in there, and then out of there is an Ethernet cable, and that Ethernet cable then goes, I have it go to my closet where I put the Wi-Fi router. And the Wi-Fi router, I then had CenturyLink install one line going back to my back office here. And so that's what they set up. After he left, I mentioned I did want some additional runs, and I wasn't going to have him do it. Plus, I didn't like his 5E cable. I wanted my cable, so I put my cable in there, and I ran 2 runs up here and 1 more back here. I should mention, when you're trying to calculate how many feet you need to go from here to here, obviously I'm not going in a straight line here. You're following lines, and you want to have, you're going maybe up and down from first floor down to the basement, and you want to have some extra at the end. So make sure when you're calculating how much you need to account for that, because the last thing you want to do is start going through all the trouble and then find out that you're 5 feet short or 6 feet short on your wire there. Yes?
I'm not familiar with the cat cable, so if you go from a 5E to a 6, does the 5E limit what actually ends up in the 6? Or?
Well, I'll cover that a little bit later. What 5E? 5E will support up to 1 gigabyte coming in here. So, and actually 10 gigabyte or 100 gigabyte could go through there. It's just that you may get some crossover or some errors. It's not shielded as much, and some things like that. So just because a cable is rated at a certain level doesn't mean that it stops working above there. It just means that you might have some problems there, and you're better off if you know that you need that speed to get the better cable and that. So if in the future I do need it, I'd just go back and replace this, and it'd be fairly easy to replace it. And inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. I mentioned, 100 feet, $10 here. And you can, if you go out to eBay, I think when I bought mine, what did I buy? I think I bought 6 different lengths. 30 feet, a couple of 50s, 75, 100. So I got a bunch of different lengths there for the different runs that I had. Okay? Yeah.
Is there any problem with just putting your own ends on and just getting the cable?
You can put your own ends on, if you have a crimper and stuff like that. And actually, I've done that before, because the very first cable that I strung in my house was Cat 4 cable, and I had done it. This time around, I wanted to save myself the trouble. These have ends on, and so all you do is drill the hole a little bit bigger. And, you're still just talking about, I don't know what it is, about half inch holes is what I drill up and down there. But, you can get it. But if you did have to redo it or that, yes, you can chop it off and put your own end on and do it. The other thing you can do if you do come up short is you can just get, a female connector. So you just put in a female to female connector, plug that in, and then plug in another run of 10 feet. Let's say you were 10 feet short. You can do that. It's not ideal, but, without having to restring everything, you could do that. So the more planning you do up front and know your lengths and things like that, it's going to make it easier for you. Okay? This, I thought I'd get more questions on the Ethernet, to tell you the truth, because this is what I usually get from people. Why the Ethernet cable? Why are you even bothering running Ethernet? Because technically, my machine in my back bedroom, my desktop PC is wireless. This laptop's wireless. My TV in front is, I have an Apple TV and I have a Chromecast. Those are wireless if I want them to be. So I don't need, there's not a need to have an Ethernet cable there because most everything does support wireless today. But it still makes sense to run that Ethernet cable to the devices that are the heavy throughput loads that you're going to have, such as a desktop PC, shared drive, streaming TV. And the reason for that is any load that you put in through the Ethernet is going to take a load off of your Wi-Fi. So you're not going to have as much contention, ensures that the other Wi-Fi devices that are connecting are going to get their fastest speed that they can. There's no overhead. So even though I get 40 megabits on the Wi-Fi, the actual throughput is, I don't know, 10%, 20% less there, because what has to happen is it has to read data, it has to encrypt that data, it has to send it out. The other device on the other end has to take that data, unencrypt that data, has to send acknowledgement back. So like a 10 megabit, you have all this communication going back and forth, and it has to be translated, it has to be accepted. So you have overhead in all of this transmission. So anything that you can do that isn't on Wi-Fi, I'd recommend doing on Ethernet, especially if you can run a cable there. And that's where it makes the most sense for the high load items there. Also, it's a more reliable connection because it isn't having to ping it or, oh, the router chose to only allow an IP for an hour and then it disconnects it. So the next time your TV or something tries to connect, it has to reestablish the connection. You've got all the overhead of reestablishing a connection, getting an IP address, and talking back and forth before it can send a single byte of data. So you just bypass all of that headache by having Ethernet runs there. Okay? So this is the Ethernet cable. I mentioned the different types. The types usually start at type 4, Cat 4, and then you go Cat 4 supported 16 megabytes of speed. So in the early days, that was more than sufficient for everything. At a maximum megahertz of 20. Then you went to Cat 5. That's 100 megabytes and 100 megahertz. Cat 5e, which is what CenturyLink put in, supports 1,000 megabytes or 1 gigabyte. So for CenturyLink, their fastest speed that they currently sell is 1 gigabyte. So Cat 5 certainly works for that. Cat 6 actually does support 10 times the speed and 2.5 times the frequency. So more frequency means that you can send more data, and obviously more speed lets you. And Cat 7 is even higher there. And if you're not familiar with Ethernet, Ethernet is, there's 4 pairs of 2 wires in the Ethernet there. And the maximum length that you usually go with Ethernet is 100 meters or roughly 300 yards there. 300 feet. I'll pass this around. You can take a look if you want. But again, I recommend the Cat 6 and buy it on eBay. Don't buy it at Menards. If you look for 100 feet of Cat 6 at Menards, you'll pay maybe $40 for it. Why pay $40 when you can mail order it and get it within the week for $10? I mentioned here the modem and the router. CenturyLink had pre-configured the router, so they had set up passwords, admin passwords, the names of the networks, and the password for people to connect in there, and they provide a label on the side of the router with what they set. I don't recommend using any of it. I used it to connect to the router and to check things out that it was working, but before I did anything, I connected to the router and I changed almost everything they had set up. So I changed the name of the networks, the SSIDs. The SSID is the broadcast name of the network that when you're trying to connect to a network, it shows up there. Well, they had called it CenturyLink 2.4G and CenturyLink 5G there, and number one, I didn't like the CenturyLink in there and didn't like stuff, so I went in and changed it. And I mentioned, and if we have time, we'll get to it. I mentioned how to change all those settings in here, which is really easy to do. Label all the wires and document what the lights look like when things are running okay. So do that immediately so that you see what's out there. And this is the example. So this is the CenturyLink modem that is in my washroom. They mounted it up on a rafter. So it's mounted up on the rafter. Electricity is coming down and getting plugged in. But it has the fiber optics coming in. That's this real thin line here. And then an Ethernet cable coming out. So what I did, this had no label or nothing on it. I created my own little label here, identifying the different lights here. And which lights, so what their state was, whether it was solid orange, or this one blinking, and these didn't have any color. And you want to make sure and do this because you will have trouble with your internet at some point, and where things aren't working. And the easiest check is just to check these devices to see if they're functioning the way that they should be. So are the right lights on? Is it getting power? Is the line connected? That kind of thing. So do it now, and it'll save you a headache down the road there, and that. And just stick it right to the modem so that at any time you can go down, you can look at it, and you can say, oh, yeah, it appears to be functioning fine there. This is the Wi-Fi router that's in the closet and centrally in the house there. And you can see my wires that are coming up here. I've labeled each of the wires. So like this one here says LIV, Apple. This is living room, Apple TV. So I've labeled where each of them is going. And then also I've taken the extra wire that I have, and I've used cable ties to string it up so it's nice and neat. No sense having this spaghetti mess of cables in there. Get it organized a little bit and have it in there. Then I have my own label on here again. On this label, I list when I purchased it, the model number is listed on there, and then all the accounts and passwords and network ID, all that information I've listed on here. Then I also list all of the lights, and you can't see the lights real well on this picture here, but there's lots of lights on here. And I've listed, again, what's their state, are they on or off, are they blinking, under normal use, what do they look like there. So if you do that, again, like I say, you'll save yourself some headaches. When things aren't working, you can do a quick check to see, well, is the router working okay, is the modem working okay? You can at least check those things out, okay? That's the end of what I did for my home network. Are there any questions that people have on my home network and what I did there? Okay.
What do you think of just extenders?
We'll get into that kind of next year if you can hold on. Okay. So the next topic here, and that was a good good question there, is extenders. So for the house where a single router can't provide coverage to the entire house, there's a new thing that's come out within the last year called a mesh network, and it can solve the problem, but it costs you, and you'll see my opinion of that, and we'll get into some of the extenders also too. Wi-Fi degrades over distance and is easily disrupted by walls, electrical wiring, refrigerators, anything that's in the way, a desk. If you have a desk and you have your router underneath your desk, even though it's a wood desk, it's interfering with the signal strength getting being spread out and stuff like that. So everything affects Wi-Fi there. A home mesh network can eliminate this by drawing upon multiple units spread around the house. So mesh networks cost anywhere from $300 to $500. They typically include a base unit plus 1 or 2 extender units. Additional extender units sell anywhere from $100 to $250. Each of these units tend to be placed 30 to 50 feet from the last one. So if you have your base unit, you go kind of to the edge of the other one, which may be 50 feet. You put one of these extenders, and if you have a big house or that, you may need another extender way out here. Or if you're going up floors, you may need one here, and then one on the first floor, one on the second floor, one on the third floor. So you place the extenders, and they just kind of take the signal from the base, repeat it to this one, which then repeats it to the other one, and gets throughout the house there. The units are relatively easy to set up. That was their main selling point, is the ease of use. But what you're paying for is that convenience of setup. It does cost quite a bit there, and actually the throughput, or how fast there, usually isn't very good with the mesh because of this repeating that has to take place. And so the signal to get from your phone back to the base unit and out through the internet may have to go through 2 or 3 units and be repeated, and it uses up the bandwidth and the time to package it and everything else. Most of these mesh networks are AC routers, dual band, dual stream, which is quite low standard. Again, if you wanted to buy an equivalent router, you could spend about $50 and you could get an equivalent mesh network router for that kind of money. They aren't high powered. They have no special features really. And I mentioned here, with a little bit of work, you could take 3 cheap routers and connect them together, create your own mesh type network, and it only costs you $150 instead of $300 to $500 or upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 for some of the bigger houses there. But this is a review from PC Magazine. They mention the best performance of the mesh networks currently is Netgear Orbi. It's a system, when other systems extend the signal, propagate it out to these others, most of them are using the same frequency and their bandwidth then of your current Wi-Fi. So it affects the performance. You can't send as much data, so it's going to be a slower connection by as much as 50% slower because of the lost bandwidth that it has to both receive and then rebroadcast the signal. The Orbi does use a separate dedicated band, which is not a band that your phone or your Wi-Fi is using there. The Orbi includes 2 devices for $399. Additional ones are $249. The drawback is, if you needed 4 units, you're up to almost $1,000. Best for ease of use, Arrow, first company to sell mesh networks a little over a year ago. The only system that automatically installs software updates. Software updates to the router, because the router is like a computer and has software and an operating system on it, should be updated. And normally what you have to do is you have to log into that router as an administrator, go to a screen, click on a button that says Update Software. And I recommend doing that once or twice a year, making sure that your router is up to date with the latest software there. Drawback to the Arrow, pricey. Starter kit with 2 extenders is $500, and the transmitters each cost, additional ones cost $199. And it's not the fastest network either. Best of security features, there's Luma. It's actually a startup company that Amazon bought a large portion of. It offers a home mesh network that's less expensive than the Arrow, but is similar download speed capacity. Starter kits with 2 extenders, $399. Additional ones, $149. It does have some additional security features to look for malware and built-in parental controls. Product's new, but seems to be accepted by a few people there. This is where I mention maybe a cheaper alternative. You don't have to buy a home mesh network to improve your strength and speed of your Wi-Fi signal. If you have a small to mid-size house, you should be able to get by with one Wi-Fi router as long as it's a good Wi-Fi router there. And I mentioned here, if your router is more than a couple of years old, it's probably worth upgrading to a more current router, and if you're having transmission problems, a more powerful router. New routers typically have more power, directional antennas that you may be able to use, and they end up being much faster, especially if you've got an old 802.11n router there. The best alternative to a mesh network is to run the cables similar to what I did with kind of my first version, where I had the router in the back room and I had a router in the front room and I had an Ethernet cable going between them. So instead of repeaters or that just take it from the one machine and repeat and repeat and repeat, you run Ethernet out to another point in the house and then have a Wi-Fi router there, which then covers that particular area. And that it does mean that you have to run more Ethernet, obviously, but it's not, everything's not going through one main router there. It's being dispersed better, and you get better performance there. Did anyone here attend the Home Improvement Club? I think it was in January, where they had a firm in that does, okay. Yeah, the firm that was there was presenting on smart homes and things like that, and he spent a lot of time on home networks and that's what they do. You essentially use these routers to create additional access points, and you run the Ethernet to these various access points, whether it's different floors in the house or different regions in the house. You do that. That's going to give you the best performance, going to be the lowest cost, and it means a little more setup than obviously a mesh network or repeaters or that, but it's going to give you the best performance there. Any questions on mesh networks? Yeah.
Just a comment too, when you're talking about replacing the router, if you do have a combined unit, you can turn the modem off, or the router off, and just use the modem part, plug a router into the Ethernet that comes off of most.
Yeah, good comment there. Yeah, the comment for the recording was you can turn off the Wi-Fi router if you have a combined modem router and replace it with anything that you want there. Yes.
So with mesh system, one of the supposed advantages is you only have one password. So you're on whatever unit with the same password.
The password set up to just maintain one password or one network within the house, that's actually accomplished by access points. And so all of these routers have the capability of acting as a standalone router or as an access point. So you can you can set it up. Again, it's a little, you have to go into the admin, you have to set it up, but you can make it so that you don't have to connect to a different network or put in a different password as you go. And that's exactly what 3M has. 3M doesn't have it. Now, certainly you can have some problems going from room to room. It may take a while to switch from one to the other, but you're not having to re-enter passwords or things like that. And it may not switch exactly when you want it to. In some cases, you disconnect and then connect when you go to a room if you're not getting the new connection. But access points do let you do that. Yes?
So an Arrow apparently had an Ethernet connector in the back of it. So you could connect all of these different access points. Are you familiar with that?
Most routers will have Ethernet connection, and that's just if you did want to connect another device or put an access point. And certainly you could do access points, but the question there would be, why would I spend the money for spend a lot of money for a relatively cheap router and
Just going away and
yeah,
better routers.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. This next information, we're almost out of time, and I knew we were going to be almost out of time. The information is all in here, is from the December 15th meeting that we did on home networking. And I'll cover some of this really, really fast, but certainly review this information if you're setting up your own home network. I've updated it with current numbers and some things like that, but basically it hasn't changed there. But I'll cover this fairly fast as much as I can here. I mentioned here a wireless router is a computer, does have process, does have memory, does have software. They support both wireless and wired connections. Geek Squad or Xfinity will come out and, well, in some cases they don't even come out. They'll just configure your system remotely, and they charge anywhere from $99 to $300. And the Home Improvement Club, I think their prices, they said their typical was $2,000 for them to come out and set it up. So, again, I don't recommend using any of these. The stuff that we've talked about is really easy to set up. You just have to connect to the right things and make sure you make some changes, and that it's not hard to do. And that's why I recommend doing it yourself. It isn't rocket science. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't be intimidated. The setup is easy. Again, this is the Geek Squad, what they charge there. So it can get rather pricey. And the problem with something like this is, yes, they'll come in and everything works, and then they leave. And now you get a new device or you change something, and all of a sudden that doesn't work. And you have to call them back to set up this. So that's why one of the reasons I recommend do it yourself. You'll find that it's not that difficult, and then you're going to be able to add devices and change stuff as needed there. Do your own setup. Router, we mentioned this, routers and modems can be combined into one box, and that's usually called a gateway. Again, I don't recommend those devices, whether you're buying them or leasing them. And I don't recommend that people lease either the modem or the router there. I recommend that you end up buying it. In the long run, you'll save yourself money. You'll have more flexibility to buy the separate components and update it. Buying can save you anywhere from $100 to $360 a year. Having the separate routers and modems, you get exactly what you want. I know people that have been with Comcast for a while. They're running with slow routers that they paid a little over $1,000 for over the 5 years. So send your money my way and buy yourself a $100 router. You'll be far ahead of the game there. Signal strength, we mentioned, in ideal conditions where there's no obstruction, can go as far as 300 feet. But in most of our situations, they vary. 10 feet to maybe 50 feet is about their practical inside the house with all the obstructions and interference there. Place the router signal where you get the best signal for your devices. Usually means as high as possible in a central location. Stay away from walls, steel objects, electrical interference, bricks, concrete. All of that's going to weaken the signal. Don't block the router with a fridge or underneath the desk or stuff like that. And then I mentioned the Wi-Fi analyzer, use that, or the Insider to check. And a lot of the routers now, the more high-end routers, will have antennas, and you can play around with those or even replace some of those to more powerful antennas there. This is an example of the Wi-Fi analyzer. It'll show you all the different Wi-Fi networks that are within range. So you can see if your neighbor, you can see all your neighbors. You can see if there's a coffee shop down the street, you'll probably see the weak signal from them. So you'll see all this stuff. And if you go into the detail, you can even see the frequency that they're broadcasting on the channel, the security that they're using, and so you can see all of that with the app there. Insider is a similar type of deal, but that's for Windows, so it works on a laptop or that. And I mentioned it helps you aim your antennas and do your stuff. So this is a screen from Insider. Similar type of stuff, shows you all this information. Because you have a bigger screen on a PC, it makes it a little bit easier to use. I mentioned here if you've got a small house or apartment, you can usually get by with a $30 or $50 router, and that'll work fine for what you need. Bigger houses need more coverage, and that's where either the access points or the range extenders, you may end up needing that to get to the other end of the house there. And they can cost, the range extenders, $20 to $200. They can be an easy solution. You plug in an extender into an electrical socket at the outer range, and it just repeats the signal. This is some examples. This is 802.11n technology. So again, if you want to get high performance, then you're going to have to pay more for the extenders. But you can get cheap extenders that are the lower end of performance, and that relatively cheap there. This is the 802.11 standards, and it's improved over the years. B is the oldest, G, N. N came out in 2009. AC came out in 2013. That's pretty much the standard right now, but there are AXs out there. That'll actually be coming out in 2018 and 2019. Supports higher speed. If you're buying a new router, make sure it's AC. If you have an older router, replace it. The prices have gone down. This is from the PC Club, the last survey that we did on what people have. It's interesting to note that 17% of the people don't have a network or say that they don't have a network. We still got people with B, G, N seems to be the most popular. AC, there's a few people. There's a number of people who don't know what they have, and some of them that are just wired. So it's to your benefit to know what you have, and otherwise you're maybe paying for high-speed internet and not actually getting it there. Wireless routers, I mentioned, don't lease it, buy it. That goes for the modem too. Xfinity, if you do have Xfinity or Comcast there and they do have their router, by default their router will set up a free guest network for any Xfinity customer to use. So I don't recommend that you open up your home network to people free of charge. So these are instructions on how to turn off that network so that people can't connect to your network and use your bandwidth. But by default, it's set up. Now, they can't get to your computers, but they get to your network and are using part of your bandwidth there. It's handy. I've used it myself when I've gone to visit my parents or that who are in an apartment complex. I can find Xfinity. There's plenty of people that have Xfinity and have not turned this off, and so I can connect to these networks all the time. This is from PC Magazine of the best wireless routers, and you can see they vary, in this case, from $80 to $300 and some, and it depends on the number of antennas, which is going to give you more throughput and stuff like that, and directional and speed, so you can check out the reviews if you are looking to buy a new one and see what's there. Security. I mentioned here security. If you just use your router out of the box and connect it, it'll work. But it's using default passwords for the admin and default passwords to connect into the router, and I wouldn't recommend that. There's actually people out there that will do war driving, and war driving, there's sites out there. This is from the site. It lists all the home networks, and you can zoom in and it'll tell you what security it has or doesn't have security, and the information there. And actually that package that I talked about, Insider, that Insider is a package that I can install on a laptop. I can, if the laptop has GPS, or if I use it on a phone, it'll actually log all of the networks and all the settings to those networks as I drive through the neighborhood. So you want to make sure that you shut down your network, that you change passwords, that you aren't using default settings for passwords and other things there. And most of the routers today don't come with manuals, but you can go out to the website. You can download the PDF file or read it online there to see how to change your settings and get these things set up. You usually use a browser to change the settings. You just point your browser to one of these IP addresses that your router is on, and then in less than 5 minutes you can go in and change your admin. You can change your SSID, the name of your network, the password to go in there, so that you get the most out of it there. You can also set the channels so that you're not broadcasting on the same channel as your neighbor or other, so that there's less interference and you'll get better throughput there. Encryption, there's different encryption. Most of the machines now are using WPS. If your router doesn't have a WPS button on it, again, get rid of that router and buy a new router. This is WPS is a higher level of encryption there. It also makes it easier to connect the machines. If your phone supports WPS and I've never connected to your router, I can go in here, I can attempt to connect to your router. All I have to do is push the WPS button on the router and it'll connect. I don't have to put in a password or anything there. So it makes it easier to connect different devices and things like that. Let's see. Guest networks. Some routers come with guest networks, like the Xfinity. I don't recommend having guest networks or turning them on. They only usually cause people more grief than making it easy for them there. But if you do want to control kids or somebody, you can create separate networks on some of the routers and isolate them that way. And this mentions routers. You can actually limit access by the MAC address, and each device in the world has a unique address, and you could set up your network to only allow these addresses into your network. So because the routers are programmable, you can really clamp down on security if you wanted to there. Kids.
You can clone a MAC address.
Yes, and that's a good point there of like on a router or on a lot of devices, I can make a device appear to have a different MAC address. So it isn't totally foolproof, but the chance of a hacker knowing what your MAC address is very small. But it's not foolproof locking down by MAC address. To keep the firmware updated, there is software in the routers. You do want to update it. Okay, any questions? I had to rush through the end there, but you can look through all that after and see there. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.